You are listening to Connect, Inspire, Create, a space for women in business to gather fresh ideas, build momentum, and discover how growth feels lighter with clarity and connection. I am Carol Clegg, your host, so let's get started. So, here today on Connect, Inspire, I am joined by my guest, Dawn Krusch, organizational psychologist, leadership development specialist, and founder of Psych Around the Globe. Through her work, Dawn helps individuals and organizations grow with intention, weaving in mindfulness, inclusion, and the deep skills that come from genuine human connection. Having lived, studied, and traveled around the world, Dawn brings a cross cultural lens to her work, reminding us that while we may come from different places, there are universal threads of belonging and resilience that tie us together. Through Psych Around the Globe, she is building a community of people curious to expand themselves, embrace empathy and action, and create spaces where others can thrive. So, Dawn, welcome. I am so delighted that you're here to join me today. And I'm excited because this is kind of a new area. So, welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Oh, so now that I gave the official introduction to you, I'd love to just ask you something a little more personal, if I may.
Absolutely.
And the, just a reflection. What's a moment, big or small, that recently reminded you this is exactly why I am doing this?
Oh, such a good way to start. I really appreciate that question. I think if I want to bring it to Psych Around the Globe and the work that I do as an organizational psychologist and a leadership development specialist, you know, the moment that I knew that I was doing the right work was when this idea actually kind of came to me and floated into me. And I don't even think that it was, I think it was more like a download from my higher self, really, what it felt like. And so the moment that I knew that I was on the right path and doing the right thing was when, this was all born out of a deep meditation. And so I was in a deep meditation. I've been meditating for years and practicing mindfulness, both in my personal and professional life. But when I went deep into that meditation, over a year and a half ago, and I came up from that meditation with this download, which it felt like, and I wrote a 15-page business plan just coming out of that meditation. It was like everything felt like it was falling into place. It felt like, wow, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I felt like it would be not only a disservice to myself, but more so a disservice to the individuals that I want to make impact for and to bring together if I didn't carry out this download that was, I feel like my higher self provided for me. So all of that really has brought me to today. And, I've been continuing to do the work and it continues to just show up as the right path for me every day.
I love that, Dawn. I love that encouragement for my listeners because that's a space that I hold very dear,
Yes.
practicing mindfulness, meditation, journaling. I think it's critical to our well-being overall. So let's jump into this area of rooted in connection. And I know that you said at the heart of every human experience is the truth that we can bridge the gap from separateness to togetherness, so needed. For listeners who are feeling disconnected, which I think is global, where can that bridging begin from that separateness to togetherness, and where do they start?
Yeah, it seems so cliche, right? But it really starts with ourselves. It really starts with us. It starts with understanding more of what your own purpose is. And in the work that I do, I do skill building. And as a leadership development specialist, as a professional development specialist, I'm always bridging the gap of that personal and that professional development. So I think that what it really starts with, it starts with you. It starts with understanding yourself, understanding your needs, your own values, what you characterize as being valuable to you. And that's different for all of us, right? And learning how to trust yourself, learning how to be in an environment where you can say, this doesn't align with me, or absolutely, this does align with me. So I think first starting with yourself and being connected into yourself. And I know you do a great job at highlighting those mindfulness practices. And that really does come back into it because once you're able to better understand yourself, you're actually able to better understand others. And so in the path that I've taken with understanding different forms of psychology and, neuroscience and the work that's being done to bridge the worlds between, science and mindfulness, it really is understanding ourselves first in order to understand others. And so
Mm.
the ways in which we can understand ourselves, learning what aligns with you. Unfortunately, boundaries are very difficult for all of us, but understanding what your boundaries are and understanding that things change over time. So when I talk about leadership or development or even growth, I talk about it as a continuum, and we all fall on a different place on the continuum, but we all have the ability to continue that growth, to continue that development, and to continue that change. So
I
it starts with us.
I think that's so important because, it's interesting. I had made some notes before talking to you, and the first thing that I had right there was it starts with inner work, right? And
Yes.
so this just reaffirms what you and I obviously both, you know, know well and experience, but putting it out there is we can't put it onto somebody else. It's let's start with us, and then we can give that gift and share and grow along with
Exactly.
others and build that bridge. So you and I both believe in mindfulness practices. I know that you specialize using these mindfulness practices, inclusive practices to support growth. So how can listeners bring in just more mindfulness into their daily conversations in a sense so that they can, and as we all come to this, because there's so many thoughts that jump around in our head,
Yeah.
but to let them feel more present and less self-critical.
Oh, it's so difficult, right? Because that's moment to moment as well. And that's thought to thought, right? We have between 30 to 50,000 thoughts a day, and every single one of those thoughts are transmuted through our emotional center. So they all make us feel different. So every day could be something different. But really, when we talk about inclusive practices or mindfulness practices that can be helpful, how are you collaborating with others? Are you actually present in the conversations that you're having? I led a visualization mindfulness course for leaders about how they're showing up in important conversations. Are they waiting to speak rather than listening? Active listening is very difficult. And especially at a time when our attention span is becoming less and less each day, over time, scrolling through social media, you don't spend too much time on one video. It's kind of jumping to the next. The world is changing so fast. So with technology and movement, we feel like we always have to get ahead of the game, but sometimes I think it's really about slowing down, showing up, being present. We talk about collaboration, we talk about becoming cultural intelligent, asking questions, being curious. I think that curiosity, especially as a leader, or even when you're thinking about growth and development, it starts with being curious. It starts with being curious for things that are outside of yourself.
It's interesting because just as you were saying that now, and we know how important that active listening is.
Mhm.
Not formulating the answer already in our head, but
Yeah.
actually just letting it absorb into your body and pause even. There's nothing wrong with silences. And I think,
Yes.
we are so pressurized, as you say, just from the speed of social media and the speed of being on the go, that it's like, oh, can't have silence. You can't have these pauses, these moments of absolutely nothing. But something else that just, as you were sharing, that came to mind for me is, and I still think it's a skill that we should all be searching to improve, is communication, our style of communication.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think that, it's very difficult when you've been stuck in one form of communication, or maybe you were raised in one form of communication, right? The nature versus nurture that we've heard about. And I think that you have to be willing to realize that maybe you're not communicating in an effective way, right? Maybe the words and the language or the verbiage you're using in that situation is not sufficient enough, or maybe it's not landing for the other person. And I think we oftentimes, right, we set those expectations of others of the same expectations we have of ourselves. And we do that same thing with a lot of different things. And communication is one of them, where the way we communicate, we feel that others should just understand and just get it and it should click into place. However, that's not reality, right? Because your experience is different from my experience. So the words, although you're hearing the words that I'm saying, you are perceiving them and processing them differently. And so I think that oftentimes we forget that. And so I couldn't agree more with that communication piece.
And I think also just giving that space for misunderstanding. We jump on our high horses and think, why didn't you get it? I used words that to me were pretty straightforward, but not giving that space and grace that there could have been a misunderstanding. So let's
Yes.
kind of come back at that. So I know that you've worked and traveled across many different cultures. I think that's fantastic. I love travel myself, so that's a huge
Mhm.
part of my life. But coming to confidence, what have you noticed about self-doubt that actually shows up universally, and what could help people move towards confidence no matter their background?
Yeah, I think it's reminding ourselves that the way that we perceive ourselves is different than the way the world perceives us. And so it's a reminder that, outwardly, maybe we need to take a little bit of risk. Maybe we need to show up a little bit different. I think oftentimes, and this is across so many cultures, that we're so scared or nervous how people will perceive us, or we don't want to be wrong, or in this day and age today, we see people getting quote unquote canceled, right? So I think there's many different factors across cultures why people feel that self-doubt and we see that trickle in a lot of different ways. But I think realizing that, the way that you're perceiving yourself is different than the way that the world is perceiving you. And also, I think it's a reminder in the, bringing in that mindfulness as well, is that, your thoughts are creating your reality always. So if you're constantly thinking, I look silly, or everyone's staring at me, or someone's watching me sing when I drive, you will constantly be critical of yourself rather than just kind of letting go and realizing that there are so many of us, right? Walking amongst each other, all living a separate life, having a different experience, going through troubles, having amazing moments, the ups and downs that truly make life worth living. But I think it's the realization that not everyone is focused on us the way that we think everyone is focused on us? And so sometimes we just need to be able to step outside of that.
Right. I know, Dawn, as you said that, I sort of think, we put the spotlight on ourselves.
Exactly. Yes.
And everybody else deserves the spotlight as well. And we each are so unique so that if we could have more empathy and compassion for ourselves, that would then spill over into having empathy and compassion for others. But we can be so hard on ourselves. But
Exactly. And back to the point that you made before about giving space, not to answer just to answer. I think that, that's the self-doubt. It's like I have to provide a response right away. I have to jump in. I have to get my thoughts out. I have to be heard. When really it's so much more beneficial to take that moment, to take that pause. But there is many different cultures amongst my own in the United States that we don't like pauses. We are
right.
comfortable in that awkward silence, right?
Uh,
So I think it all really is so interconnected there.
That's so interesting because what comes to mind for me there, I work with positive intelligence behind my coaching, and
Mhm.
we talk about these saboteurs that come to take over and hijack us, and how to recognize that and then be able to shift into a sage moment. And controller comes to mind for me in that sense, is that we feel we need to control.
Yeah.
That it's and we can't let go of that control.
Mhm.
Whereas we can. And then so I come back to this word empathy because I really think it's so important. I mean, I know we hear it time and time again. Have empathy. Can you be empathetic? Can you have compassion for that person? But if we talk about putting it into practice, even in leadership and everyday life, they meld together.
Yes.
We don't run a business and then have a separate personal life, and we're not a
Yes.
leader, and or we're a leader at home and we're a leader with our business or in our workspace. But how would you sort of talk about empathy in action?
Yeah. I mean, empathy is like the pinnacle of the work that I do. And it's really when it for me it brings together all the work that I do with psychology, all the work that I do in leadership development, and all the work that I do in mindfulness. I think that it really just it's like that, that top cherry that we all are always reaching towards. I think when I am and when I'm teaching or educating, I think it starts also again with yourself being vulnerable, talking about moments when you've been vulnerable, talking about moments when you have had that unconscious implicit bias. And those are very difficult moments to call out, but those are moments we all have. And I think bringing them to light and showing that, I'm a human, I make mistakes. I have thoughts that run through me that are not my own, that I do not claim, right? Because they're just thoughts that float in, whether that is how we were raised or the culture that we live in. Sometimes these things are just kind of placed in us without us even wanting to be attached to that. So when I think about empathy and when I'm talking to leaders about empathy, or even when in my own life, I think it is the time to sit back in the silence. And I, even if you do not feel comfortable, and I talk to in a professional or a personal sense, even if you do not feel comfortable with something like meditation, even taking the time to just sit in silence and see what comes up. Take away some of the distractions each day so that you can see what comes up. You learn more about yourself again, and then that provides you the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And truly, we are all so connected, and there is so many overlapping struggles and joys that we all have that as we continue to become more of a technology driven world, there is many ways to connect, but we become more disconnected. And I think the more we can make light and have those difficult conversations or shed light to when we haven't been our best selves, that brings us closer to being our best self.
I love that what you said because that vulnerability and just letting others know because we all want to put the cap on those thoughts that we think we shouldn't have and not be exposed to somebody else. But then how beautiful when you go somebody else had that same doubt or that same thought that and you can discuss it because you can explore it together. It's
Yes,
not right and wrong.
exactly. And
That,
when you give somebody else, when you give somebody else the path to come to that, to get to that level with you, or you bring yourself down and say, I'm not perfect. I have had this
mm,
experience as well. Although you may perceive me as never making a mistake and this and that and the other, it's like I have done that myself, but this is how I've grown. This is the steps I've taken to become a better version of myself. And
mm,
I think I go back to, the term, what you practice grows stronger. And when you try to really practice that empathy and you seek out information, you try to learn and be curious, every day you're just increasing that. And it is a
mm,
skill. You can continue to develop that. And it's not, we don't all start at the same levels of empathy as well. So I think it's just a reminder that you can always grow that skill and that ability. So if you feel today like, I'm not very empathetic and I don't really know how to become very empathetic, there is you are not lost. There's many ways, and the hope is not lost at all. It's always possible.
yeah, it's being open to that growth journey and realizing we're all on this path and we never stop learning.
Yes,
And it's
exactly.
beautiful, to accept that as a gift. So I know that you guide people to build psychological resilience
Mhm.
as a pathway to belonging. And so what small practices do you think for our listeners today to just feel grounded? And we've spoken about the mindfulness, the importance and taking time out on your own, but are there other practices where they could just, when life's feeling so overwhelming and so uncertain, to help build that resilience?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of techniques and mindfulness that we could bring in that could help that, right? Like different silence practices, somatic practices, things like that. I think if you're thinking in a professional sense, building that resilience is looking at what you've done in the past, where you are today, and where you want to go into the future. You know, building that picture for yourself, visualizing that for yourself, looking at the things that you have overcome. I think oftentimes in life, we set that goal, we hit that goal, and we keep on running. The next goal, we don't stop to acknowledge how far we've come in our journey. So I think taking the time to stop and give yourself the acknowledgement first and to see what you have done. And in order to get further into whatever path you want to be on, you have to stop and do that evaluation of where you've been and where you are today. And that's in a personal and a professional sense. But resilience it's tricky, right? Especially in such a difficult world that we're living in right now, where in so many different cultures there's upheaval and there's disconnect and confusion and a lot of scarcity. So that trickles into our body, that trickles into our systems, that trickles in how we respond to things. And I think it's also remaining true to your values, who you are, of how you respond to things. Understanding when and, is the right time to respond, but understanding yourself in order to stay true to that, it will always get you to the next place you're supposed to be. And I think that practicing resilience is not easy. So I never want to pretend or to shed light on it as if I'm out here spreading a message of, yeah, just be resilient. Because if it was that easy, we would all be extremely resilient, right? But that too is something we can continue to grow and change over time.
I know as you were sharing that, I was thinking it's not just a coat that you could just put on and go, I've put on my coat of resilience and I can take on the world.
I
You know,
know, we wish, right?
it's baby steps and it's just building those in layers. And then I guess remembering, there's a reward that comes from that because then you're not so scattered and you're not feeling so awful and so sad if you just have little layers of resilience that help you bridge and get to the next place and the next place. And then, as you said, I use the word celebrate, and it's, celebrate yourself. If that means before you go to sleep at night, is look back at your day. You can find a moment that you can be proud of, no matter how small. And then
Always.
just absorb it into your body and just go, yeah, I did that, and tomorrow's a new day. We start all over again.
Exactly. And all we have is this moment, right?
Mhm.
We're constantly living in the future, we're constantly living in the past, but truly all we have is this moment. And you should be proud for just being in this moment. And that takes a lot of work to get there. And I also want to shed light that that doesn't come easy for all of us, especially if you do suffer from things like anxiety or,
Right.
it's always looking to the future of the anticipation of but truly just reminding myself, reminding anyone I work with, or even anyone in my personal life that, all we have is this moment and, be proud of yourself in this moment because if nothing else, you're living through a difficult life. You're going through challenges and changes all the time, day to day. So just, give yourself grace too.
Give yourself a break. I know that's just what
Yeah.
I was thinking. Well, Dawn, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing from your heart, sharing stories, sharing encouragement. And I know that you and I are very much on that same path and realize the importance that it starts within us. It's the inner journey, and then we give back to the world. And you think if we strengthen that inner journey, we're holding hands with the rest of the world and helping strengthen them. So I think of that as a very beautiful picture. So for listeners who want to learn more, I encourage you to explore Dawn's work at psycharoundtheglobe.org. I'll have that link available in the show notes. And it's a space dedicated to curiosity, connection, and growth. And then I will have a link to connect with you on LinkedIn, link on LinkedIn. And anywhere else that people should look for you, or we'll put your email in if they want to connect with
Yeah,
you.
that's
Anything
perfect.
else you would like to share with our listeners on where to
You
find
know,
you?
Thank you so much for having me, Carol. This has been so wonderful, such a great conversation. I want to just give the encouragement to keep going and to remind everyone that, every day you can become the best version of yourself. And we're constantly changing. Reminder to give yourself growth. And remember that all of your professional development is also your personal development. So it doesn't matter if you're building skills in your professional life, you're always building yourself in your personal life as well.
two go hand in hand. Well, thank you. And as always, for my listeners, I'd love to hear what you're taking away from today's conversation. You can do that on my LinkedIn page, which is specifically for the podcast called Connect, Inspire, Create. Add your comments. Dawn's episode will be out there shortly for you to listen to and contribute to the conversation. So reach out, share your reflections, and let's keep creating spaces of clarity, courage, and connection together. So thanks again, Dawn. It was
Thank
lovely.
you. Thank you.